Good afternoon. My name is TJ. I'm the Family Training Coordinator at Families Together in New York State. Today's webinar is titled How to Effectively Share Your Story, hosted by Families Together in New York State and CTAC, and presented by Crystal Rose, Family Workshop Development Coordinator at Families Together in New York State. We are very excited to have Crystal Rose from Families Together to speak to us about how to effectively share your story. Thank you for joining us. I will now pass it on to Crystal to introduce herself and get us started.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to our workshop today. Like TJ mentioned, my name is Crystal Rose, and I am going to be talking with you a little bit about how to effectively share your story as a family peer advocate, because as we know, our stories are vital. And I want to remind everyone, and I can't wait to hear some of the stories that some of you have brought, because we are going to have a segment where you're going to work on a portion of your story. And let's see if we can develop and kind of fine tune what we've already been using to talk about our lived experience story. So thank you so much for joining, and I'm going to just get right into it. Okay, so the power in your story is how I've, decided to address what we're talking about, because there is power in your personal lived experience story. That story has the power to inspire, it has the power to empower, and it can honestly teach people tools and resources that they can use in their own lives. So here are some of the goals and objectives that we are going to go over today. One of them is develop effective skills for telling your story, and you're going to use strength-based communication. The second is understanding the difference between an illness story and a recovery story, because it's vital to know what elements dictate the story and what elements can drag the story down. Third is understanding why your story is important, because it is. And the fourth is to create pathways for empowerment. Okay, so I'm excited to get started with you guys. And if you feel necessary, you can use the reactions. If you see on the bottom of your screen, there are reactions. You can use the clap, you can use the raise hand function. We will do Q&A at the end. So I do ask that if you have impertinent questions that are not included in the presentation, at the end, you can save them for the Q&A. We're going to give you time to go through all the questions that you may have. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about stories. So why is storytelling important? Storytelling is a way to empower, inspire, and give hope. In many cultures, storytelling is a way in which we carry on values, principles, and traditions to future generations. Often, elders are storytellers and they bring stories to their youth. As you know, many of us come from a variety of cultural backgrounds. And in each cultural background, you'll find that storytelling is a way to carry down so much. And so, in that same way, we will actually be using our lived experience to carry on our tools and our inspiration to the families that we serve. Oh, I see I have some questions in the chat. And yeah, we'll definitely have the slides available. And also don't forget the Q&A will be at the end, and everything that you have to and you need to know will be addressed in this meeting today. But yes, the slides will be made available to you at the end of the workshop. So, we want to make sure that we understand the storytelling and we understand what's happening when we're talking with our families, making sure that we are in control of that story and that story basically achieves the mission that it's set out to do. So, the elements of your story. One of the first elements that we will talk about with storytelling is the character element. As you all know, the character there is the main character. So who is the main character? That is you. And sometimes the main character will be your child. It depends on what aspect you are trying to deliver when sharing your story with your family. So the character is where you develop the background on who you are and who the story is about. So that is one thing you want to think about when developing your story. Develop the character and make sure it is clear when you're expressing it. Who is this about? And who is this person? Like what are some attributes to the person that we are talking about in this story? So what are some attributes to you? What are some attributes to your child? What are some attributes in your lived experience that is important for people to know? A second element in storytelling would be the challenge. So the challenge will highlight what adversities you faced during that experience. And so when you're talking about these challenges, you want to make it clear. And I want to highlight this. When you're telling your story, it's important to add names, labels, and titles to what you're talking about. You kind of want to avoid this, that, her, them perpetually because it can become unclear through the course of storytelling what the challenge is. So you want to make sure you add like language that sort of solidifies what it is that you're talking about when you are telling your story. So, what are the adversities? What did you face? What was the challenge for you, for your family, for your child? So, you want to describe that and be detailed. So, if you want to say that your child was having trouble in school, so to speak. Um, my child was having trouble in school was a open sentence. It's pretty general, but you can say some of the challenges that my child experienced was transitioning from one activity to another. Some of the challenges that I experienced was understanding my value as a mom, even though I was struggling with with understanding and using tools for the situation that I was in. Be very specific about the challenge. The third aspect and element of your story is the journey. So describe what you learned along the way and the people you encounter. So if you think about any classic tale, any story that a journey is included, they often bring in the elements of the where, like the scenario, the setting of everything, the town they were in, the time that they were in, what year was it, and what was happening in all of that time and in that town. So that journey, the person, place, and thing, the setting that you're in, that journey is important to develop of a great visual around the story that you are telling. And so you want to include it was sort of like the year, like in this season, or when I was X years old, or during the time we encountered the pandemic, or you want to kind of highlight the setting. And that is how you talk about the journey. Now, you will go into talking about the hero. So the hero was the person, the place, or the thing that was the change agent for you. And that hero can actually not necessarily be a person, but it can be a feeling. It can be an organization. It can be anything that was the change agent that stimulated and perpetuated you to say, you know what, this is where I'm going to turn the page. And these are the actions that I'm going to take moving forward. So when I say develop the hero, that is a place for you to think about what was the trigger? What was the catalyst? What was it that I experienced? Or who was it that spoke to me? Or where did I receive services that I said, you know what, I feel encouraged, I feel empowered, and now I can do what I need to do. So understanding where the hero falls is a great element that actually is one of the most inspirational elements for the listener to your story. The conclusion is the overall takeaway that should be inspiring, leaving the listener hopeful. So, as you're wrapping up your story, you kind of want to see that you're engaging with this individual. This individual is involved in your story. You'd like that story to be as immersive as possible and as inspirational as possible because the goal in sharing our lived experience is to allow for someone to see that they are not alone It's to evoke the emotion to say, okay, if you did it, then I can do it too. So the overall takeaway, remembering to make it inspiring and make it hopeful, because we really want to bring up the conversation, elevate that conversation so that your listener, your family knows that they can do what you did. And it's power in that story that the experiences that you've went through and that you've actually come out on the other side. There is so much power in that. And so you want to make sure that is shared effectively. Okay. So, in the process of sharing, it's important to use strength-based communication. So, strength-based communication, and I'll give you the definition here, it will emphasize opportunities for success or highlight the power of an individual or a group. When expressing your story, strength-based language helps the listener feel immersed in the setting and empowered to see themselves in that story as well. Okay, so strength-based communication is a great tool because there is a way to share a story without it. And you're going to see some examples in the future slides as what is the opposite of strength-based communication. So in the future slides, you're going to see examples of what strength-based communication could and should look like. So strength-based communication is using people first language. So, one example of people first language is instead of saying, you, and I want to give a great example here. So I'm trying to pull from my lived experience. But instead of saying, I suffer from depression, you may want to use the language of, I am a mom who has challenges with my mental health. And you can even highlight the fact that it is depression, but you want to sort of put your name and the person in that title. You want to put yourself there. It's people first. Instead of saying, my child has autism, you can say, I have a son who is on the autism spectrum. You want to put the son and not just my child as if there's no connection there, there's no emotional connection. You kind of want to put the person first, making sure you highlight that this is an individual. I am an individual. My child is a person who matters, and this is the challenge that they're experiencing. So, people first language really helps to kind of personalize the story that you're telling. Now, it's important to differentiate between an illness story and a recovery story. I mentioned that earlier, and we're going to go into more detail about that in a second. But an illness story, it can discourage, it can make someone feel like if that was so deep and dark, then maybe I don't want to go through that, or maybe I don't want to do that. Whereas a recovery story highlights what went well. It highlights the benefit, it highlights the lessons and the successes. Third and not last, but we'll be specific about places and experiences. So being specific, once again, allows the listener, excuse me, to be involved in the story that you're telling. So you want to make sure that that language is detailed and it includes aspects of the story that aren't easily misconstrued. So, illness versus recovery. When telling your story, it's important to determine if it is illness oriented or if it is recovery oriented. So, examples of an illness story would be a strong focus on weakness. And you don't want to stay too long in that area. However, the vulnerability is vital. So sharing the vulnerability is very necessary, but you want to make sure that you don't dwell too long on where that was and how that was, because it can focus too much on the weakness in you as the individual and take away, and it can eat away from the strengths that were involved, that you used and that you found in yourself from your personal experience. You want to make you or your child the center of the conversation. Kind of going back to the character aspect that I was mentioning to you before. So the character would be the center. The character is you. The character is your child, depending on like I mentioned, what you're conveying to the family that you're speaking with. So you want to make sure that they are the center and make sure that the story follows that character all the way to the end. So it's important to find ways not to deviate and go too far off topic. You sometimes, and many of us can, as we're sharing our story, we can go on little tangents that can take us down these tiny little roads into a new conversation, but making sure to develop tools to circle back to the point of what we're trying to share as you're sharing your story. Um, that is not necessarily, it's not good to make yourself the center, but it's good to highlight the character and make sure that the character is developed and not necessarily you. And so your emphasis on deficiency and challenges is part of the illness story as well. So if your illness story includes an emphasis on deficiency and an emphasis on challenges, then the family may become discouraged. The parent or caregiver can feel like maybe this is not something that I can achieve. And so that's what an illness story can look like. And these are some of the things that we don't necessarily want to focus on. Now, a recovery story is the opposite. So it will include things like a strong focus on your strengths, a strong focus on when I was experiencing this situation, and we'll call the situation X. These are some of the things that I used to mitigate, or to kind of resolve how it had an impact on my life. Your recovery story should focus on what you converted in your darker situations and how you turn them into the light situations. A recovery story can include empowerment and listening. So it's empowering the listener and making sure that you reaffirm the listener, telling them, hey, this is what you can do. This is how it, if I can do it, you can do it. And this is how the situation can be played out in your life. Sort of giving them a movie that they can see and an end that they can visualize is one way to turn an illness story into a recovery story. We also want to make sure that our emphasis is on resources and on outcomes. So, as you're sharing how your success is developed, you want to include associated resources and associated outcomes so that it can sort of tie the whole thing together. Because sometimes, and I don't know if anyone else has experienced this, when someone is sharing a story with you on how they have moved to another point, you don't really see in your life how you can get that done. It can become difficult to sort of put yourself in that place. And it's like, okay, I know you did that, but I don't see how I can achieve this given the barriers that are in front of me. And so, in the process of empowering, in the process of sharing, you want to include associated resources with each strength, with each tool, with each development that you've accumulated, so that you can also inspire and empower the family that you're dealing with. So, some of the strategies for an effective recovery story should answer the following questions. And there may be more questions that you can develop. There may be more questions that you can think of, but these are just some suggested questions to keep in mind. One of them being, what specific challenges did you overcome and why? So, once again, being detailed as to what the challenge was and how you overcame it. Another question is, how is this relevant to the listener? And where do they fall in your story? So, like we mentioned about not letting the story be so focused on you, but making sure to be inclusive of the situation and the listener's experiences, the family's experiences, you want to make it relevant. And that's why we have our lived experience so that we are relevant guides, we are relevant counselors to the families that we're serving. So remember to listen effectively to your family situation, making sure that the solutions are family driven and making sure that when you're sharing your lived experience story, it is something that is useful to them. It is a tool, it is a resource, and not just another story that they can shake off or shrug off. Another question and strategy that you can use is how do you maintain that success? And so, as you're talking about what was developed within you as a parent, as a caregiver, you also want to talk about a little bit about the maintenance of it. because there are many times we can make an achievement, but if it is different from our typical behavior, we are now making a behavioral change. And behavioral changes can be a challenge within itself. And so maintenance to that change is important to understand what tools did you use to keep yourself on track? What tools did you use to keep the success and the strength going? Because we can all have a breaking point where we decide that we're going to make this change and we're going to, do a lot of things, but the maintenance is really key. And then final, what tools or strategies were most effective in promoting the change? So the change agent. So if you can talk about, let's say, for example, as a parent, you were dealing with a housing situation and you had a neighbor that sort of held your hand all the way through. And we would call that natural supports when we talk about in family peer advocacies. The natural supports can be a neighbor, it can be a family friend, it can be a spiritual advisor. Those natural supports can be a change agent. The change agent can even be a service. So you can say how you went to um, the Human Resources Administration and there was a worker there that gave you so many tools and they told you what they did and they gave you some shortcuts and some strategies and some inside information. And as they're sharing that story, you are super inspired to go ahead and take that on and make that change. That is a tool, that is a good strategy in promoting the change. And so someone might hear that and say, okay, so let me try that one. Your family might hear that and say, I love the way you shared how you went down to, the food stamps office and you did X, Y, and Z, or someone came and they gave you this little tidbit. I want to try that too. Maybe my third or final visit to that office isn't going to be as ineffective as I thought if I approach it this way. So in our story, we do want to make sure that these details are included, these strategies are used, because you would be surprised. So much of the details is what inspires people and gives them something to use and really allows them to become empowered and effective. Okay, so we have a little video, and upon playing this video, we're going to observe the speaker and the story that he is sharing. After we observe his story and what he's sharing, I'm going to have a few follow-up questions, but I do want you to think about some of the things that we've shared, some of the things in your story, the strategies and the tools that you're going to use. I want to know how much you can identify inside of this video that we're going to watch.
Let's time travel way back to the 1980s. I'm 3.5 years old, lying on a gravel driveway, my face ripped open. I'm lying here because moments ago a dog bit me and gave me a warning. He non-verbally told me to stop pestering him on this hot summer day. My parents picked me up, wrapped my face in a towel, and rushed me to the hospital. Here, a wizard surgeon named Dr. Weber spins magic with his hands, gives more than 100 stitches to me, and puts me back together. Days later, I look like this, and I begin to fear looking in the mirror. This face scares or at least startles my family, friends, and strangers too. I watch how others react to my appearance. I recognize the shock on their faces as they see mine. I'm quickly learning about empathy. Fast forward a few years. I'm in 2nd grade at San Antonio Elementary. On the playground, one student says, "Throw the ball, Scarface." Another one says, "Ew, you look like Frankenstein." They draw attention to how I'm different from them because of the way I look. But really, we are more like my friends than we are unalike, as Maya Angelou would remind us. Still, my classmates' words introduce a new kind of hurt to me. It's the kind of hurt that digs into my heart, not the kind that dug into my face. I'm angry, embarrassed, frustrated, but I don't name my emotions out loud. I hide them, like I wish I could hide my scars. Miss Cockrell, my teacher, sees what I tried to hide. She observes how my anger acts as a barrier to my education, so she works with me to overcome my painful emotions. She works with me because she cares, because she's human. Miss Cockrell teaches me that scars show we can experience pain and persevere. Whether internal or external, our scars display we've grown beyond our wounds. Our scars are a powerful testament to our resiliency and our natural ability to self-heal. In short, Miss Cockrell teaches me our scars make us beautiful. and I begin to heal inside after I've long healed outside. End of our trip down memory lane. In second grade, I learned about my times tables. I learned reading and writing, and I learned our scars make us beautiful. I learned these lessons and many others from a passionate, professional, exceptional teacher who saw me as a human, not just as her student. Ms. Cockrell strayed from her lesson plan with me. She gave a little more time and attention, and she changed my life trajectory. Had she not taught me about our scars, I might be a very different person today. Maybe I'd still be wrestling with my anger, or embarrassed by my appearance, or frustrated with my fate, but I'm not. I'm at peace, because I know our scars make us beautiful. Thank you, Ms. Cockrell, wherever you are, for the way you helped set me on a path that led me here today. Also, it's important to remember that my family reinforced this lesson with tremendous fidelity. I appreciate and honor the way they've supported all my learning throughout life. Consider my story I told, the lesson within it, and imagine how I might teach it differently. Good afternoon, class. Everyone please find your seats. Today we're learning about self-confidence. What is self-confidence? Well, it's being okay with who we are. Why does this matter? Because by overcoming challenges and negative emotions, we can better focus on other parts of life, like times tables, reading, writing, and higher academic performance. Some helpful reminders about self-confidence: our imperfections make us perfect because they make us more human, and our scars make us beautiful. Please make a note of this, as this might be on the test. Of life. Now, I joke about this in an oversimplified way, but you get the point. When we remove humanity from lessons, we remove humanity from learning. We forget everything we study some way, somehow, involves real people. And when we focus just on the ideas or concepts, we start to distance ourselves from ourselves. This type of mental conditioning can lead us to being in the box. In the book, Leadership and Self-Deception, the Arbinger Institute defined being in the box as seeing people as a means to an end, obstacles to our goals, or things to manipulate to our advantage. In contrast, when we get out of the box, we see people as people. We honor who and how they are as humans. Today, some conversations about education focus on being in that box. Students are seen as statistics and test scores, numbers that must rise so our society functions. But what happens when we get out of the box? How will our conversations change when we see students as people, each as a creative being, each as a personal story? In my work, I have the good fortune to listen to community members talk about what they value in their schools, in their education, and in their future. They do this by sharing their personal stories, and they learn as they listen to the stories of others. One of the common themes that emerged from these dialogues focused on how often teachers and students switch roles, and teachers end up learning just as much from students as vice versa. Now, I speculate these students are teaching teachers through personal story, not by imparting the latest Common Core curriculum or referencing academic journals. All this to say, it's amazing when we open our minds, ears, and hearts how much the world will teach us. Next time you have a conversation about education, get out of the box. See students as people, like how Ms. Cockrell saw me. See families, teachers, principals, district administrators, and government leaders as people too. How will our discussions be different when we see all the pieces and the parts of the vast education system as people? And when you have these conversations, I challenge you to engage in civil public discourse. If you don't know where to start, why not begin with your personal story? Show us the beauty in your lessons and in your scars. Every day, I carry the lesson Ms. Cockrell and my family taught me. To me, my face is a reminder to be confident and humble, to be mindful, compassionate, and patient. Through my personal story, you learned why I think our scars make us beautiful. Through your personal story, what lesson will you teach us?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Kara. And how many people really enjoyed that brief story? I found it to be pretty inspirational, and I really do hope that inspiration was shared with the rest of you. Now, you enjoyed it. Thank you. So I want us to stop and think a little bit, especially as I get back to the slides. I want us to stop and think about what elements of storytelling did we see in this user's story. And if you can raise your hand or you can put it in the chat. But I prefer to hear from you. I'd love to hear everybody's voices, see your faces. So if you can tell me, what elements did you notice were in the speaker's story? Oh, and by the way, the hand raise feature is on the bottom by reactions if you cannot locate it. But yes, Christina, go ahead.
Yeah, hold on. Yes, hello everyone. Hi, how are you? The speaker to me was very engaging. There was never a dull like moment.
Hmm.
It was you wanted to know more, you wanted to hear like to the end how this person got through all these different struggles, how they overcame. They talked about how people helped them along the way. There were road bumps where children were not nice, but that
Hmm.
wasn't the biggest part of the story. The biggest part was the overcoming.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing that, Christina. I see David Barker, you have your hand raised. You can unmute yourself.
Thank you. No, I thought the hero of the story was his teacher, and he brought that back to his teacher. He made the challenge very clear, the scar on his face, and how that makes us all unique. And it's I forget exactly what he said, but he drew in scars as a strength.
Absolutely. He was able to convert the challenge that he experienced into a strength and told us who the hero was, which is a tool that I would love for us to develop as well as we share our lived experience. And let me see here. I see a few answers in the chat. Oh, and Amy, yes, Amy Wing, you can unmute yourself. I'll hear what you have to say as well.
Oh, hi. Hi, everyone. I have a very bad scar on my face, so this particularly interests me. But this was an example of the recovery part of sharing your story. And I thought that this man was a very positive, and he did actually draw attention to somebody who touched his heart and his life and put that out there as well. So I just like the fact that he shared so positively his life story.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Amy. And yes, the recovery aspect, the strength based communication, the language that he used constantly brought us back to the success in his story, back to the power and the strength in his story. And I see in the chat someone said the hero is the teacher. So that was from Anne Marie Scott. Absolutely. The teacher, I did identify the teacher as the hero as well. So the teacher is the person who was the change agent and allowed him to see these scars not as like a curse, but as a blessing for him to share this story and empower others. I see a lot of responses like the hero, positivity. Absolutely, absolutely. There was a lot of hope. I see hope. There was a lot of hope, positivity, and strength-based communication here. Now, given that we were able to identify some of the tools in his story, how will this impact your storytelling moving forward? So I'd like to see a few hands of anybody who would like to share what they would like to include moving forward in their storytelling. Oh, I see in the chat, Nakia says the difference between how he told the story, there's a way to convey the lesson without specifically naming it. Yeah, there's definitely, and thank you for sharing that. There's definitely a way to sort of take this story without dwelling too much on why it was negative so that you're not necessarily triggering your listener, but using that story to inspire the listener. Absolutely. Okay, so how will this impact your story moving forward? Does anybody want to share on that one? Yes, Christina, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you so much again. So to reiterate, like they just went through like the beginning and the middle. There's room to reiterate what happened, the hardship. But I
Mhm.
think what ties it all together is when the end has an overwhelming sense of accomplishment and positivity. So I guess like a strategy wise, you leave the beginning and the middle to kind of, you know, take the journey to these low places, but then you rise out of the low places into the light. So that's the way I see the story being written for this person, as well as anyone who can tell a story.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing, Christina. And Jasmine Williams, you can unmute yourself.
Hi, good morning or afternoon now. I just wanted to say that throughout the entirety of his presentation or his story, there was positive reinforcements even when he was telling about the adversities. I'm sorry, I'm like, I don't know why I can't speak English today. He mentioned that a part of him having the scar and people continually recognizing him for the scar, he learned about empathy. And I thought that was a really positive spin, especially for someone being so young. He was like understanding that most of the encounters he was having were from places of people feeling bad for him, and that's how he picked up on what empathy was. So I thought that that was really important, because it's easy to get caught up in the sadness of the actual tragedy, and he kind of made it a positive spin while speaking on the tragedy.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jasmine. And I agree with you 100%. It's easy to get caught up, especially it's your personal story, so it's close to you. But understanding how to, once again, convert that energy, convert that story is so important. I'm going to take Leanna, and then I'm going to read a couple of things from the chat. So, Leanna, you can unmute yourself.
Hi. So first of all, I have to say that he did a really good job of telling his story, right? So and I think that what I would, how that would impact my storytelling is just to really um kind of make sure that when I'm telling my story, that I give you just enough to get you to understand why this was difficult for me, right? Let you know how I you know what happened, who helped me, or how I was able to overcome that difficulty, and how just that learning that lesson can transform my life and your life as well. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Leanna, for sharing it. Absolutely. There's so much to take away from what he shared. And I see in the chat, Ravon, you said he created a frame to tell his story, and you would like to implement that into your storytelling. Perfect. Yeah, there's so many things. And the fact that the way he framed it is an awesome resource. I did see someone ask for the video, so we'll see if we can share that link. I'll definitely check in on that. But it's an awesome resource to understand how to frame your story, how to share your story. So thank you, Ravon, for sharing as well. So I'm going to move forward in the presentation. Everyone's input was so beautiful, and I do appreciate it. Um, so in the next slide, wait, excuse me, I'm sorry. We have our group exercise. So now that you've identified what aspects from the video you are going to take into your story, we are going to take 5 minutes. It is currently 12:42. So 12:47, I'm going to ask for 3 volunteers to tell me something about your story using one of the tools that we've discussed. So you can do almost like a elevator pitch about your story. What is your inspiring story? How are you going to pitch your story in 1 minute or less into us and tell us? And using the gentleman's story as an example, I would love for you to share. So at 12:47, I'm going to ask for you to share your story. You can take 5 minutes starting now. Those of you who are working on your story and you have finished, you can use the raise hand feature, and I'll just make note that you are done and you are ready if it's before the 5 minute mark, before 12:47.
Do you want us to put it in the chat?
Oh, sure. You can definitely put it in the chat if it's easier for you. For those that may find it might be a bit more for the chat, you can always just speak it out. But I'm going to choose 3 people in the end to share. You guys have 1 more minute. Okay, it is 12:47. Your 5 minutes are up. I see exactly 3 people with hands raised. So I will take you guys in order. And then everyone else, if you have your story written, feel free to share it in the chat. This way you can inspire the others that are in this Zoom as well. So David, I'll start with you. Let's hear your 1 minute story.
1 minute. Okay. I'm 66 years old, and my story spans approximately 45 years. And I'm white and I'm privileged, and I understand that. And I know that a lot of you may not um, or think that I can identify, but I did briefly. I started with a suicide attempt when I was 23, and I wasn't diagnosed until I was 26. My family has bipolar up and down from my grandmother all the way through my son. There are probably 15 in my immediate family who have bipolar. And when I was going through this, I was thinking to myself, especially with my son, how a single mother who did not have the advantages of a psychiatrist and a social worker and uh, psychologist was able to deal with the issues I was dealing with. But I did run a support group for 6 years for parents who had bipolar children. And I came to understand that everyone has strengths. And my message, it's great that I've seen that. And I've seen myself be able to get through this. I've seen my son, who was bipolar from birth. He was handcuffed, arrested, put in rubber rooms, had his teachers give up on him, and I thought he was never going to succeed. But now he is 32 years old and he owns his own gym with a business partner, and he's doing great. And I believe everyone else, even though they may not have the same background that I do, we all have the strengths and we can all succeed.
Absolutely. I love your story, David, and thank you so much for being vulnerable enough to share with us. I appreciate that. I have Jasmine who is next. Please tell us your story in 1 minute.
Okay, so my 1 minute story is that I am a mother to two beautiful and very active, energetic children. My son is 6 years old and my daughter is now 2. Um, when I gave birth to my daughter post-COVID, I was so eager to jump back into the workforce and feel the normalcy of connecting with people again that I went back to work when she was about 2 weeks old, not realizing that that was a form of postpartum depression, not in the sense that I was, constantly down or sad or crying, but the sense that I was not wanting to connect with my daughter the same way that I connected with my son. I was still breastfeeding and getting up at night and holding her and doing skin to skin, but there was no emotional connection because I prioritized work and getting back into the workforce. So once my daughter turned about 2 months old, I had an epiphany. And it was a really great moment where even though children can't speak that young, they definitely have a way of telling you things and communicating with you. And she communicated with me that she needed me in more ways than I was providing to her. And then that inspired me to reach out and have the courage to tap into my own village, as well as do some research about getting help. And I reached out to an organization that offers dyadic services to children and families to help repair their relationships. So connecting with that organization led to me parenting different, me viewing life as a whole different, trying to let go of those what I call generational curses that were passed down to our families that were unknowing of new information. And now I am reaching back and helping other moms that may be in a similar position that I was, that is unidentified, undiagnosed, and you're just constantly like living on autopilot, taking a second to step back and breathe and actually view what you're doing, and just knowing that it's normal and we have the hands to help. So I actually work for an organization who is offering dyadic services to children, families with children from birth to 5 years old, with the hopes that we can alleviate some of those disastrous stories that we hear about, for the moms that don't get the treatment and the families that don't have access to those services. So that's my 1 minute pitch. I think I got it in 50 seconds.
Thank you so much for sharing, Jasmine. I appreciate that. And finally, we have Lucille, and then we're going to go quickly through the next couple of slides. We're just a little bit behind on time. And so, Lucille, please tell us your 1 minute story.
I'm so sorry, but I can't turn my camera on, so please excuse me for that.
That's okay.
So I had a 19-year-old daughter that struggled with mental health problems as well as a heroin addiction. So my challenge as a parent was to be able to get her the services she needed to overcome her addictions, as well as help for myself on how to deal with it. I was able to do that. I did get help for myself. I was able to get her into a detox, but unfortunately, she did relapse and she died of an overdose of heroin. So I continued to work with the support group and eventually became employed by the organization that helped me. And now I'm trying to work with other parents to see how I could help them with their children that have addiction issues. And I do have a question because basically my story is a positive one for myself. However, I don't know how the parents are taking that my child died of an overdose. You know, here I am trying to help them with their children. However, my own child died of an overdose. I am trying to make it a positive experience for everyone to see that as a parent how these challenges can make us grow. So that's basically my story.
Well, Lucille, thank you so much for sharing. And my condolences to you. I see other people are saying they're so sorry to hear that news. But yes, thank you. And we can also talk more about ways that we can turn, because these stories are hard, considering that they are our real stories and they are our personal life. So we can talk more about, how we can use these stories, even though they may be difficult, for others to receive, as well as could potentially be difficult to share. So thank you so much for being vulnerable enough to share that with us here in this Zoom. I appreciate that. Okay, thank you so much for sharing. As you can see, some people left in their stories in the chat, and I wish I can go through them all, but I do thank everybody for sharing. And please observe these stories. They're important. Everybody's story is valuable. And see if there's anything in there that can inspire you, because other people sharing their stories help for us to build our own. Being a great listener and receiving the information. The gentleman in the video also said something similar to that, is as you're listening to other stories, you are also inspired for your own. And so, we would typically stop and think, how do listening to other stories make us feel? It can often inspire us. It can often generate some empathy. And we want to make sure it's empathy and not sympathy. Because sympathy sort of says, I'm sorry for you. That's so sad. I don't know anything about that, but that's messed up. Whereas empathy says, no, we're on the same page and I know what that feels like, or I can understand that you have that feeling. And I'm with you in that feeling. Sitting with you while you're going through this is empathy. And being able to say, I know that you're feeling this way, and I know, I can connect to what that feels like. So listening to other stories, other people's stories can generate empathy and help us to connect to one another. Now, when sharing, it's important to be mindful of our triggers, whether in your story or your family's story. So be willing to pause. If you have to take a break, it's respected and it's understood. If your story is intense, and sometimes the break isn't just for you, it's for the family receiving your story. Because as we connect through empathy and as we share these experiences, we may need to say, okay, this is a lot. So making sure to connect, maintain boundaries on what we're willing to disclose. To see that, okay, this is a part that is for me and I'll share around it. And that's okay. It's okay to have a boundary and you don't have to feel guilty about limiting certain things that you decide to share, and be mindful of oversharing. You want to support your listeners' boundary too. So be mindful of your time, be mindful of their time, and be mindful of what might be too much for them to take on. And they will sometimes let you know and give you cues for that as well. And so Too much or too little, our lived experience is very much like salt. For those of us who like to cook here, now when using salt, too much salt can ruin the dish, and too little makes it bland. So when sharing your lived experience story, you want to make sure you have a great balance of how much of your personal story you're including and giving room for other parts of your story and other parts of their story. Okay, so we are at the end of our presentation. Thank you so much for wrapping up. I am going to pass it over to TJ because we are closing out. We are 2 minutes to 1 o'clock.
Thank you, Crystal. It appears that we did participate in answering questions earlier, but I'm going to leave it open for a few. Does anybody have any last minute questions for Crystal before we move forward? I guess, Lucille, if that's, you left your hand up. Yes, that's not going on. Anybody in
I
the
think her
chat?
hand might be up from before.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I was kind of wondering. All right, so it appears to be no questions. So upcoming events are being authentic as a youth peer advocate, and that's March 20th from 12 to 1. And the other one is what gets in the way, barriers in the family work and under-resourced communities, and that's March 28th from 12 to 1 p.m. as well. Everybody, the surveys in the chat, just so you remember. And thank you, Crystal, for the great presentation, and thank everyone for your time and attendance. As a reminder, today's recording and slides will be available on the CTAC website within the next 2 to 3 business days. Our coordinators will be sending a link in the chat box so you can complete a brief feedback survey, which you will also receive in an email in case you're unable to complete it at this time. On behalf of FTNYS, Families Together, and CTAC and Crystal, thank you for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.